good evening. I'm Jonathan Higgins from our club room in the Cincinnati Union Terminal. Good evening tonight, and welcome to tonight's presentation for September of 2024. We go down to the Newsreel Theater to our presenter this evening, Cincinnati Railways, Nolen Wright. Take it away.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to thank everyone who was able to make it. There's a lot of friendly faces, familiar people, of course, people who have never been in this room and would have no reason to be. And I want to thank you guys for coming, and I hope you guys enjoy. So today, I will be presenting Cincinnati Railways, a modern tour. We will be following historic timetable locations throughout the city of Cincinnati. A quick note, I wanted to keep it within the city proper, so we will not be covering things like Northern Kentucky and CCET. Just a disclaimer. So, just a little bit about me. I'm from Newport, Kentucky, and now I live in Cincinnati, Ohio. In the background, you see one of my favorite places, the Welcome to Newport CIND Bridge. So, I run the Cincinnati Railways blog on Instagram and Flickr, mostly on Instagram. And I've been doing that for about 6 years. I started in 2018. And I joined the Railroad Club in 2024. So the scope of this presentation. There are 3 railroads operating within the city proper: Norfolk Southern, CSX, and IORY, or the Indiana and Ohio Railway. There's also CIND, but they share dispatcher and locomotives with IORY, so today we will be treating them as one. Norfolk Southern operates its Cincinnati Terminal sub, which runs from the north end of Ludlow Yard to the south end of Sharon Yard, near 246, so maybe a little north. CSX operates their Cincinnati Terminal sub, which actually consists of several lines, all radiating from Queensgate. In addition to that, they operate their Indiana sub, which begins in Lower Price Hill, running westward. IORY, the main source of local railroading in Cincinnati, operates 4 lines: the Midland sub, the Blue Ash sub, the Oasis sub and secondary, as well as the CIND, which again is technically a separate railroad. To start off, let's begin at the Oasis subdivision. This is my favorite line in the city, to be honest. I worked in Linwood for a couple years, right outside of Undercliff Yard, before the realignment. And let's just say I really enjoy the dinner train and the stone trains. So the portion we will be covering runs just north of CP Oasis, which is actually abandoned now, up to Mill, where the line intersects with the Norfolk Southern, NCD, as well as the Dayton District and Cincinnati Terminal. This timetable is from Conrail 1980, and mileposts are from Oasis. Starting off, this says Oasis, but it's just north of there, near milepost 1. What we're looking at is IORY 3493 shoving an iron ore train back towards the Cincinnati Barge and Rail Terminal. The main line is at left, and this is the southern end trackage. Our next timetable location north is Penn, before Conrail, called Pendleton Yard. This was the original locomotive facilities for the Little Miami Railroad, first tracked into in 1841, making this the very first rail yard and railroad in the city proper. Although Pendleton was actually not annexed at the time, so first railroad in Cincinnati is a little bit questionable. For what it's worth, this area has now been redeveloped and is referred to as Walworth Junction. Farther north, we come to the south end of Undercliff Yard. This is a great location where you can still see the abandoned main line off in the distance by the Gons. What we're looking at is an iron ore train heading southbound for CBRT, where they carry pig iron received by barges. At the north end of the yard, we see a rare sight where there's actually 2 trains on the Oasis. At right is that same iron ore train. At left is Ohio Central 4030 carrying a loaded Melvin Stone train. This is the heart of business on the Oasis, and if it weren't for Melvin Stone, it is likely that Undercliff Yard would be completely abandoned. Also interesting, in 1907, Undercliff was equipped with a rider hump, something you don't see today. A lot of people think of Queensgate and Sharon when they think of hump yards, but Undercliff actually did have one too. This is a nice location, really good for photographs. We're at Rendcombe Junction, which is technically just north of here, but this is where you can access it. We're looking at the dinner train, which looks like it's heading north, but it's shoving south towards Oasis. The entrance to Undercliff Yard, as well as the depot, which is demolished, of course, would have been located in the background. Behind me is the southernmost portion of a Y, consisting of Rendcombe, Red Bank, and Valley. Here we are at the northern end of that Y, and this is one of the coolest locations on the Oasis, in my opinion. At top is the abandoned Norfolk and Western Hyde Park Branch Trestle, which was originally part of the Cincinnati and Eastern's connection to Idlewild. In the back, we see a PRR-style position light signal, most likely put there by Conrail, which unfortunately has been cut down since this picture was taken. The track at left is the Norfolk Southern Cincinnati terminal, where we see T46, the Sharon Clare transfer, tied down, waiting for a crew. At right is the Oasis mainline. A really good location, we come to the northern end of CP Ridge, which intermingles with location of an old Norwood Heights siding, making this a little bit of a confusing spot, but now referred to as the northern end of CP Ridge. The train is stopped at the position light, visible through the tunnel, waiting for clearance through the Y. This was another Y constructed to help the PRR and Norfolk and Western trains access Union Terminal via the Midland, at that point the B&O. Near the boarding area of the dinner train, we come to the Langdon Farm Bridge. This is approximately milepost 12. This was a grade separation project built by the PRR, where you can see the road clearly ducking down beneath the bridge. Moving on, we come back to the city limits, where we come to the IORY Midland subdivision. The timetable you're looking at comes from Chessie, which has changed ownership significantly since then, with IORY's purchase finalizing in 2014. The portion we will be covering runs from Oakley Yard in the neighborhood of Oakley down to NA Tower in the small town of St. Bernard. Here we are looking at IORY 3492, moving light as it switches the north end of the yard. Very visible is the south platform of the Oakley Depot, retained in a grade separation project. Still clear is the B&O insignias on the bridge. So picking up, we're again in that Conrail 1980 timetable, where we're looking at the Blue Ash subdivision, what they called the Blue Ash secondary running track. The timetable shows it running from South Avondale, which was south of the Oak Street Tunnel, up to Blue Ash, Brecken, Ohio, at the county road line. So what we're going to cover runs from East Norwood up to Silverton, where we're trying to stay within the city limits. So picking up, we are back at East Norwood, where we saw that LTEX locomotive pulling the Gone south. We're looking at IORY locomotives pulling boxcars north up the McCullough Yard lead. This was the intersection of the B&O and the CLNN, originally Marietta and Cincinnati intersecting with the CLNN, so for what it's worth. Moving north, we come to Harris. This is just north of where I was standing. I thought it's worth mentioning because that bridge, you see the locomotive crossing, is newer, built by the city of Norwood, Cincinnati, whatever you want to call it, when they built the Norwood Lateral. So this scene has changed a lot since people have last railfanned it. The core of operations in Cincinnati for the IORY, McCullough Yard, easily the best place to see fallen flags, old locomotives, weird things, whatever you want to call it. At left, we see Rail Tex Red, 4083, moving to Ohio Central. Then the orange and yellow are all Genesee and Wyoming, IORY. Then that green locomotive we've seen before is Burlington Northern. I think it's worth mentioning that this yard was significantly upgraded by the Pennsylvania Railroad, PRR, to better serve the GM plant farther south. Here we are at the north end of the yard. The signals below represent the south end of CP Ridge, which we saw before on the Oasis, where the north end of McCullough Yard can be seen crossing over top via the 1888 rebuild of the McCullough Viaduct, which was originally a wooden trestle. Now here we are at a very recognizable location. This is the Silverton Depot replica. What we're looking at is the Blue Ash Local, a once-a-day train that runs on weekdays as needed from McCullough Yard up to Brecken and back, switching a variety of industries that mostly receive boxcars, tankers, and hoppers. And the replica was built in 1976. The original depot was on the other side of the tracks. Moving on, I think a lot of people will understand why I'm doing these at the same time. We have the CIND and the CSX Indiana subdivision. As they stay in the Cincinnati city limits, they run completely parallel, just separated by trees and wires. The timetable at left is Chethi, the timetable at right is Conrail. You'll see some locations do not agree on names. This is a good example of that. Here we are at East End Stores, as CSX conductors like to call it, or Oklahoma, as everyone else likes to call it. The two tracks at left are the CSX main line, while the two tracks at right are the CIND main line. This area is dispatched by CSX. The locomotive, CSX 2043, is pulling Y194, a job that originates in Queensgate and switches all the industries along River Road before heading back. Same place, opposite side of the tracks, we see the CIND Honda job with IORY 3223 leading it south, or east, whatever you want to call it. They're stopped at Oklahoma, again, also the east end of Stores, whoever you ask, where the Honda job always has to stop, call CSX, and then proceed into Queensgate. It's a good place to see trains because there's a bike trail that runs parallel to this. Moving on, we come to South Side. There's a bridge that passes over the tracks with a sidewalk, making this a very good spot where you can see the trains running underneath. That Y194 job I was talking about earlier switches the industry at left. The train we're looking at in the foreground, CSX 758, is leading an auto rack train south, or again, east, timetable south. The train at right is a CIND local, which is preparing to cross over. On the other side of the bridge, we see LTEX 2400 carrying an IORY stone train west down the CIND. New York Central and Conrail referred to this area as CP West Oak, although it has been dark for some time now, meaning there are no signals. This was the first revenue run of the LTEX engines received by IORY. And I should mention, this is an IORY train moving with trackage rights over the CIND. Yeah, isn't that something? At CP Wade, again, no longer referred to as CP Wade, this is completely dark, we see IORY 4084 leading a CIND local west. At right is the expansive Valvoline campus, which is still served by rail, primarily through CSX, though. At left, we see River Road. This is a good 4-track crossing where it's actually 2 separate crossings and you can stand in between them. So, good spot. A mile west, we see the same train at Anderson Ferry. This is a good location if you like rail history, especially interurbans and streetcars. The gas station that left was once the location of a Cincinnati, Lawrenceburg, and Aurora depot when overtaken by the Cincinnati Street Railway had a loop installed, none of which remains now. It's worth noting that the Cincinnati, Lawrenceburg, and Aurora's last operating engine is stored at the Illinois Railway Museum and is in perfect working order. Here we are at Cargill. We see Y194 tied down as it awaits clearance across the intersection, or junction, whatever you want to call it. At Wright, we see the out-of-service Cargill spur. Unfortunately, they have completely converted to trucking, so no more Cargill trains. At the west end of Double Track, we come to Fernbank. CSX 758, which we saw earlier, is carrying autoracks east as they zoom east down the main line. You can see the switch for the west end of Double Track in the distance underneath approximately the 15th autorack, as well as an interlocking cabin. The CIND main line is barely visible by that white pole. Moving on to our biggest portion of the night, we come to the CSX Cincinnati Terminal subdivision. Again, this consists of several lines already out from Queensgate, but the portion we will be covering is going to run from CT Junction north to Glendale in our attempt to stay within the city limits. The timetable you're reviewing comes from Chessie. That's why that to Oakley is still there. Here we are at Glendale, possibly the most famous rail fanning location in Cincinnati. What we're looking at on the right is an 1888 built depot, which was built to replace an 1854 depot, which was burned down. We can see the train in its YN2 paint still, clearing the milepost 15 signs. Some say the milepost 15 B&O marker still exists in Glendale. Just south of the depot, we see CSX 836 hustling north as it carries autoracks. I liked this picture and I wanted to include it because the space in between the track, which is pretty obvious in this picture, was once occupied by a third track used as a center siding or pocket track. Our next timetable location south, Wyoming, another really popular rail fanning spot today. The area at the left was once occupied by the Wyoming Depot, and when torn down, was converted into a park, which was recently upgraded to become ADA accessible. So, good to see. If you look at the signals, you can see a lunar indication, meaning something is going to be lined on the empty track soon. Here we are back in the city of Cincinnati proper at Hartwell, aka Parkway. This is a good spot where there's two roads paralleling the track on opposite sides, so you can see the train for a good straightaway. The depot for Hartwell was a nice two-story wooden structure located on the other side of the crossing near the code line poles, well, what used to be code line poles. This is an interesting picture. What we're looking at here is a very late Amtrak Cardinal as it rushes north through Carthage. It has just gotten clearance to speed up after leaving Ivordale Yard, and they were making no waste in that. The Carthage Freight Depot, I'm not sure if there was a passenger one, was located just behind the crossing gate on the left, near that box, the signal box you can see. Back in the north end of the yard, we see a Chessie cat, what looks like, on CSX 6900. Now, this isn't authentic as much as I wish it was. This was added by a crew and was promptly taken off the next day. But it still shows, so you can still get this. And this was taken with someone who's here, Ben Smith, so one of my favorite rail fans in the city. At the south end of the yard, we see CSX 5217 navigating the massive, uh, marathon complex, my bad, pictured over top, at left, and at right. The St. Bernard Soap complex was located off to the right out of this picture, although it was shuttered in March, unfortunately, and is now on the market. It is very unclear what is going to happen. This is a nice one, 3125, leading an intermodal train north. What looks like a pretty uninteresting spot, besides the nice curve for the pictures, was actually where the CH&D main line was put out of service in the 70s, 1970 to be exact. It would have continued straight off to the right of the picture, through Spring Grove Cemetery proper, through North Side, and then towards Mill Creek Road, where the trackage was active until 2009. At left is the B&O/Chessie built head-on connection. This is a nice spot. I thought I would include some non-CSX power for these ones, as Winton Place sees trains for CIND, NS, IORY, and CSX. What we're looking at is a 6-engine Norfolk Southern southbound passing down track 3 over the Mill Creek. At top, we see some color position light signals, one displaying an approach indication. It's rumored that these are going to be removed soon, unfortunately. Just south of here, literally turned around, we see IORY 4071 leading a CIND interchange north. At right is a CSX southbound on its way to Queensgate. The road at left is Canal Ridge Road, named for its proximity to the Miami-Erie Canal, just off in the trees to the left, which was actually graded over and used for the Cincinnati subway surface running portion. The RTL, Rapid Transit Loop, Clifton Station, was located just behind me and was an elevated station, torn down in the 60s. This is a shot I can never recreate now. What we see in the background is the Early and Daniels elevator and silos, now completely removed. We are at RH West, the north end of Queensgate Yard, the heart of railroading in Cincinnati. We're looking at a pair of locomotives, CSX 5276 leading, waiting for their train to be built so they can pick it up and head north. This is the departure yard, meaning local yard jobs have already sorted cuts and they just need to double up and head out. That's it. This is easily my favorite spot to rail fin in the city. We come to the Hopple Street Viaduct, where it seems to be you can see everything. We're looking at approximately 5 trains moving right now, 2 CSX yard jobs, 2 CSX road trains, and an Amtrak heading south through Hopple. This was the location of the northern end of the Southern Railway, although it now is kind of unclear. Here we are at the west end of the yard. This is our 3rd time seeing the same train tonight as it crosses so many subdivisions. We're looking at LTEX. Again, that's Larry's Truck and Electric. 2400, pulling an IORY Stone train south through the CSX Queensgate Yard. This track is referred to as the West Bypass, and we're underneath the Hopple Street Viaduct. The CH&D main line would have been in the trees to the left of me, just across the creek, although this portion was abandoned in 2009. Still at Hopple, we see 3 CSX yard jobs meeting up in a good moment of fate. 8471, 8242, and 8467. What they're doing is assembling cuts of cars sorted by the hump, a large earthen mound equipped with computers and what are called track retarders, which slow down the trains and automatically sort them when they roll down the hump, basically. And then these trains are putting those together for the trains at the north end of the departure yard, what we saw at RH West, where they'll then double up and head north. Here we are at KOY, still called Hopple technically. This is what I was talking about, the north end of the Southern Railway, or Norfolk Southern, as it is now called. There is a Southern Railway freight station to the left of me, not pictured though, as well as a Big Four one, which are very much worth visiting. I wasn't aware of it. About a mile south, we're on the Western Hills Viaduct, looking at the CSX engine shop, which was significantly renovated in 2018, as well as the hump. Again, at extreme top left, we can see that Early and Daniel silo, but in the foreground, we see a plethora of CSX locomotives. The Western Hills Viaduct is slated to be demolished in 2030 after the new one is completed. This is a location I'm sure the majority of the people here know, and I'm sure the majority of you were here when I took this picture. So this is up in Tower A, that way, behind the Museum Center, a major interlocking tower built for Cincinnati Union Terminal in 1933, equipped with 187 switches, which could automatically line switches, automatically indicate signals, and automatically flip derails with a flip of a switch. The train we're looking at is CSX 1973, the Chessie Heritage Unit, pulling a CSX Family Days excursion south. In the background, we see the Cincinnati Metro Queensgate Garage. At the south end of Queensgate, we come to the 8th Street Arrival Yard, where trains arriving to the yard will drop their cut, usually splitting it in half, for the hump job to come pull them up the earthen hump and drop them down, where they'll be sorted. This specific locomotive, CSX 755, and its partner, not sure what that was, are heading to the turntable. Back on the CH&D, Cincinnati, Hamilton, and Dayton, we come to Yard 2, one of the few Mill Creek yards remaining, although it has been significantly downgraded in the last 2 years, and now just consists of one rip track. Here, what we see a local CSX 8335 heading south with 2 more engines on their way to Northern Kentucky. The track in the foreground is the only yard track remaining in Yard 2 and is now used for unloading tie trains. Cincinnati Junction, with its mast signals, can be seen in the background. This is different from CT Junction, which is coming up. Worth noting, because this is CT Junction, where we see a southbound CSX 5274 leading a freight over the viaduct. The trackage at left, diverging, is the Cincinnati Union Terminal southwest connection, which was visible in the prior photo, and the track the train is on is the Chesapeake and Ohio approach viaduct, rebuilt in 1929. In the background, on the far right where you see some CSX open-top hoppers, is where B&O Junction was, the southern end of the CH&D main line. Our last railroad of the night, the Norfolk Southern Cincinnati Terminal. They've significantly downgraded the signals on this since Conrail, so I thought it was best to use 2 timetables. The one at left is Conrail 1980. The one at right is Norfolk Southern 2003. The portion we will be covering will run from Control Point 248, CP 248, to 8th Street, just near the Ohio River. Here we are at 248, where we see a southbound led by NS 9410. At left is the very large GE complex of Evendale, Ohio. At right in the background, we can see the signals, masts, of Control Point 248. That is the intersection of Norfolk Southern and IORY, as well as the Norfolk Southern's Newcastle District, NCD. Two miles to the south, we see NS 4143 dodging the Laughlin signals up top. At left is Moeller Roofing, which was constructed in 1875 due to its proximity to the canal as well as the railroads. The canal in this portion was not used for the subway, but was used for the highway, unfortunately. Well, or fortunately. 2 miles to the south, although it looks like the same place to me often, is 252, where we see an NS local T97, which runs from Ross Estates to Sharonville, Sharon Yard. Just a bit to the south, we come to the south end of a New York Central grade separation project, where we can see Union Pacific 6913 tied down as they're awaiting their crew change. In the background, the grade is very obvious and shows just how much of an elevation this line takes, which often has a crew shortage due to this problem. Here we are in Elmwood, at the north end of the small Ross Estates yard, the intersection of the Norfolk and Western and New York Central, or Big Four, railroads. At right, I always love this, we see someone pausing to watch the train. Also at right, we can see the St. Bernard Soap running track, which this train is shoving onto. Again, St. Bernard Soap is no longer in operation, and T97's carload has been significantly decreased. This is another location I really like, one of my favorites in the city, 254. At right, what I was really trying to take a picture of is the Norfolk and Western Barry Yard lead, very rarely used at this point, mostly just used for training employees. At left, we see an auto rack train using its trackage rights over Norfolk Southern as they head south towards Queensgate. Many of the code line poles along the Norfolk and Western portion still stand to this day. South of Ross Estates, we come to Beach Street, aka NA Tower, where we see NS 4100 along with a WFRX Mac in tow, and it's BNSF paint. That's Burlington Northern Santa Fe. This is a mixed freight, dodging the P&G campus over top and at right. P&G has recently announced it would like to move the majority of its production to the East Coast, although it is not yet. They haven't said anything about what's happening here. Off of the Big Four and onto the Southern, we come to Guest Yard, one of the best remaining artifacts of the pre-Queensgate era. This was the only Mill Creek yard which was not cut over, reduced, or anything by the construction of this, due to its ownership by the Southern Railway. It is sandwiched between Queensgate now, but they still make use of the yard, and coupled with their Sharon yard at north, they make a good use of it. Coming to our last train of the evening, we're at 8th Street. I wanted to include this one because this was also taken from the Museum Center, Cincinnati Union Terminal. What we're looking at is their Cincinnati Union Terminal connection at left with their Guest Street connection at right. The signals clear the block where they're going to head south towards Ludlow Yard, the end of the Cincinnati Terminal for Norfolk Southern, where their CNOTP starts, which was recently sold to Norfolk Southern. Here's everything I used to make this presentation, mostly different timetables, different people I know like Jeffrey, Eric, and some others. There were a lot of interviews, personal, that I used. Dan Finfrock was a great help in this, and he is an interesting man, and I love him. So I want to thank everyone who was able to come here tonight. This presentation has been a dream come true, and I hope to see you guys again at the Cincinnati Railroad Club. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining tonight's presentation. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel on YouTube, the Cincinnati Railroad Club. Make sure you check out our website as well. And you can also become a member of the club as well. Just search and Google Cincinnati Railroad Club, and our website will pull up, and you can become a member. Thank you so much, and have a great evening.